Hi, welcome to Unapologetically You with myself, Tuls, and the wonderful Kelly. And today we're going to be talking about internal stress manifesting into physical pain. Now, today we are going to talk about our personal stories with stress, of course, and then also how stress in the environment prevents us from failing or learning, maybe self-conscious, or we're lacking self-confidence. What type of things, what elements are adding to our stress, and then what elements are adding to our physical pain? And as always, Kelly's probably going to get a little bit maybe eye rolls on this one, but she knows me and my background research, and I had a little bit of a gander on some papers recently, especially looking at physical pain, right? So Kel, like when we have all experience some sort of physical pain, right? Let's take the tightness in our neck or our shoulders are stiff. I know I've had these for far longer than I realized that they were manifestations of stress. What do you think? Have you had any?
For sure. And I think I realize that when I'm not breathing properly or breathing deeply enough, my shoulders become earrings and they sort of shrug up to my shoulders and they stay there. But yeah, breathing for me is my tipping point where I know that I'm tight. I'm the reverse of you. You know you're tight. And I go, I'm not breathing well. I know I'm tight. I don't necessarily feel it. Maybe I'm like that so often that I don't really pick it.
Well, the breathing right is an interesting one, because I remember speaking to somebody who was suffering with their running because of the way they were breathing, and then it ended up tightness in their neck and their back and their shoulders, but it was all because of their breath work.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a circle. It's not like a linear thing. It's not your breathing goes wrong, then your chest goes tight, then your running goes wrong. I'm sure it's breathing, tight muscles running, and then you're running poorly, so your breathing is, it's just it's a catch-22. Is that the
Yeah,
word? Is that
yeah, for sure. And you make a really good point, because actually, as you just so rightly said, it's not one after another. It's everything's almost happened simultaneously, so you can't really pinpoint what was the origin of it. But it's
chicken and the egg.
Yeah, it's all accumulated. But it's funny, because even if we go to a doctor with those similar symptoms of my neck hurts or my shoulders are tight, and perhaps you're suffering with headaches, even a doctor will ask, what's going on in your life at the moment?
Oh, I haven't had a doctor ask me that. That's good.
Well, maybe those who are aware of things, that they hopefully can go beyond the medicinal prescriptions. I know Deepak Chopra, first, obviously, he is a doctor. He's a qualified medical doctor. But he went into spirituality and meditation because he was figuring out people's problems weren't able to be solved by medicine, in terms of where is this actually originating from? What more is to your life? And how can we elevate you and the way you're living by getting to the root of the problem, not necessarily plastering the problem with medicine?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I love that doctors are starting to be asking those questions. And I didn't know Deepak Chopra was a doctor.
Yeah, I didn't know that either, but I've been obviously on my spirituality bandwagon, but I like backing it up with research. So I know Dr. Joe Dispenza does that a lot. And I'm sure we'll get to that him at some point, as he crops in and out of our podcast quite a bit. But then also I wanted to talk about, like, getting to the root of today's topic, like stress, anxiousness, all occur usually, commonly, when there are major events in our lives. And it could be a death in the family, it could be loss of a job. And the release of that cortisol causes inflammation, right, in our body. So with the inflammation in our body, it increases our heart rate, it narrows the blood vessels, and all of those changes lead the body to feel pain, essentially. So it's hardly surprising when we experience stress and we have an impaired immune system, and that gives us the likelihood of catching a cold or a virus or other infections at a higher rate, right?
Absolutely. But also makes you more vulnerable to injury. as well.
Yeah.
And I've got a story about that. I've probably told you about this story from when I was at one of the rugby league teams. Will I tell it again anyway? Have I not told you?
Tell it again anyway, because I can't remember. Maybe you can jog my memory.
Yeah, you'll remember it. So this player, and I won't use any names at all, but this player was a top tier player, had played for his country and he played for his state, and he played at top level in club footy. And he was constantly getting hamstring niggles. And we rehab it the way you would consistently and typically rehab it in a sports setting. You have your physio and you'd have a return to play protocol, and they do skills off legs and everything, that we know works. And he would respond. He would actually respond, and physically he'd respond, and he'd pass all the assessments and put him back in the team. And in the warm-up he'd do his hamstring again, or even in training he'd do his hamstring again. And we thought, what are we missing physically? What are we missing? But for one day, for whatever reason, I actually got on really well with this player, and we finished a rehab session in the gym, and he was lying on the floor, and so I just laid down on the floor too, and we talked while it was cool down. And turned out that he was having dreadful personal problems, emotional issues with his girlfriend. And without going into all of that, the relationship was rocky, but it was also at a very precariously rocky place. And he was emotionally battered by that. So that was just something he told me at the time, and I made no connection whatsoever. Anyway, these hamstring problems niggled and continued. And now there's a doctor who works in Germany, particularly with soccer players, but soccer players and hamstring injuries, right? It's pretty prevalent, yeah. So anyway, we contacted this doctor and ended up having an appointment with him. And he was a physical rehab doctor, but he spoke more about the mental side of things with this player, and the emotional and also financial side of things. So things that are stresses that we don't necessarily consider stresses, right? So you would go physical stress, or this is a stress, but not break down the components of the stress. So the financial and emotional stresses were what this doctor focused on. And it turned out this player, which we all knew of at the time, this club was going through financial difficulties, and they told the players that if they could recontract them the following year, that it would be on probably half the amount of money that they were currently on, which is a stress to even think about. And that's if they get contracted again. So this guy was a major money player in the club, so he would either get half the amount or no contract. And the fact that his hamstring was constantly niggling kind of pointed toward no contract at this stage. So there's a stress, huge stress, and the emotional state of his relationship. So the doctor actually said hamstring injuries come from feeling financially or emotionally vulnerable, but you don't feel like you're being supported. So when you don't feel like you're being supported, you're more vulnerable to a hamstring or high hamstring into posterior chain injury. And your back, you get a sore back when you feel like you are carrying a burden too big for you at that moment. And I went, and this player went, yeah, my back's also sore, but I'm not going to mention it to the club. So this doctor just nailed it by finding out those two things. And you know what? Worked with him one session, hamstring healed. Of course, things with the club did not work out, and he did not get contracted again. So that was something that he had to learn to deal with. But he did. He had the tools to deal with it, I guess. And the emotional relationship broke down, but he drew a line in the sand under it and moved on. And so, but those two factors, right, created injury in a player that had physios available to him daily, doctors, and all the medication and prescription stuff that the doctors can provide as well as care, and all the specialist physical care that we were giving him, and that emotional aspect and that financial aspect was making none of it work. Isn't that interesting?
I find that so interesting because if there's more research around this, I'd love to read it, because I don't know that much around that type of research. Yes, we go into rehabilitation. Yes, we go into strength training. We add all this mobility stuff in, but we never get to the point where we say, actually, you need to see a psychologist or you need to go see a counselor. And I think that we need to start to normalize going to these professionals on a reoccurring basis. I say reoccurring as in, how often do we treat our bodies to exercise and training, taking out that narrative that we have to train because of something. General populations now, enjoy training, doing something for your body because it's capable of doing it and you want it to do more. Now when people say about relationships, you don't have to go to a counselor when your relationship is broken down, because apparently that's too late. Go see a relationship counselor when you are in a happy relationship, because that's when you can still start to cultivate those types of connections, right? And we're not doing that with our body. With our mental health, it's not normalized even now for men to speak out and say, like you said, it would have been a very vulnerable time for your athlete to speak to you about his relationship. And sometimes a lot of male athletes in particular don't feel like they can be honest, especially when it comes to an injury, let alone the origin of what they're suffering mentally, to a professional, because if they feel vulnerable or weak per se, in inverted commas, then they're going to think, well, maybe they're going to take me off the lineup team, or maybe they're thinking I'm going to be disadvantaged.
Yeah. And that can happen in real life as well. You don't want to admit to a frailty or a weakness. I mean, weaknesses are, there's such a connotation to the word, isn't it? I mean, a bad association with the word of being weak. There's really, in our society, there's nothing good about being weak, is there?
No, not that I can think of.
No, right? So, yeah, you don't like to admit that you've got a weakness, unless it's for chocolate or something like that, and you laugh at yourself because that's not life-threatening, one would think. But, and it's not career-threatening in truth. But, but just having a weakness or admitting to a weakness is something that's a stressful thing to do. So, even having to admit it.
And I can hear your cat's agreeing with us too. So obviously he wants to be part of this conversation. So cute, Cal. But also, what I was going to say is maybe we should start to change the narrative of, rather than it being vulnerability has been classed as weak, especially in a sporting environment, that being vulnerable takes strength, takes courage.
Oh my gosh, so courageous. So courageous. A lot of strength. Yes.
And even having this conversation, like talking about when I went through physical pain. So I went through a really tough time. I'd probably say at least 7 or 10 years ago. And I really didn't understand what was happening. I broke out into a rash, and then I broke out into just like reactions to food. And then I'm thinking, okay, well, this is really weird. So I went back and forth to the doctors, and I'm not the type of person to go to the doctor. Like, if it's serious, I'll go to the emergency room, but I don't need to go see a doctor, right? So I'm just like, okay, well, fine. I'll go figure out what this type of thing is. I don't know what it is. After quite a few consultations with the doctor, she suggested that I had IBS. And then her analogy was, well, can't really tell why people have IBS. I mean, the wind could change and something could flare up. So I was like, well, it could be anything. Like, I even went through the FODMAP diet, which is very, very strict on what types of food could, associate with IBS symptoms. And for those who don't know, it is irritable bowel syndrome, but it could be caused by anything too acidic. You have to be quite neutral with your gut health. And our gut is very sensitive, but it's also very resilient, right? It has good and bad bacteria. So when you end up getting flare-ups on one thing which is classed as gluten or wheat or dairy, and then all of a sudden you have something like watermelon and you also get a breakout on that, and you're thinking, what on earth is going on? And it took me so many years to go through that. And then I realized, and I can't remember at what point I realized this, is because I kept trying to see if I still got an allergy with pizza and a little bit of chocolate. And then I'd be like, oh, okay, so maybe I should limit that because I'm still not there yet. But this is the thing, like going through years of that and then getting to a point now where, touch wood, I have no allergies. I have no gut imbalance. I can eat all of the types of foods that I want to without having a severe reaction. But it's funny you say back health. That really triggers me because when I had a really upsetting time, it was about 3 years ago or something. So something had happened in my personal life, and as we all know, sometimes trauma in your personal life can then end up manifesting into physical pain. And I had this really sharp pain between my lumbar, like I would probably say L3 to L5. For those who know this region, it's quite susceptible to a lot of discomfort and back pain for a lot of people, especially if you're in manual labor or things like that, or sitting at a desk, for example, for 10, 12 hours a day. Like, I had gone through that the night before, and then all of a sudden, so I couldn't sleep, I was completely distraught. The next day, this sharp stabbing pain went through that region of my lower back, and I couldn't understand what it was. And then I realized, I went to the physio, I had a doctor like see me because I was within that environment. So I was just like, guys, like this is really painful. And I don't cry easily. And tears were coming down my eyes because how much pain I was in. And I had no idea. And even then, after the trauma I had experienced, it didn't occur to me that it was originated from that. And until later on in the year, and even the year after, when I'd again gone through personal pain regarding the work situations, I could feel that. It's almost like a little beacon of light just going boop, 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 like you're getting close to, what did you say was back pain? It was something that is really
carrying a burden. You have a burden that you're carrying that's too heavy for you right now.
That literally felt like my burden. And the only realization was when later on something had happened and I could feel the pulsing. And I'm like, it's almost like it's telling me, it's warning me.
Yes, absolutely. And they're the words I use with all the rehab clients. I do a lot of general public back pain clients. I just have that niche now, I think. But yeah, I can make someone cry at just asking the right questions. I'm not proud of it, but definitely you build a relationship very early on with someone when you say, these are often the people I get coming to me are undiagnosed back pain. So the doctor will send them to me just because I'm known in my area now, and they'll go, undiagnosed back pain, there's no actual reason we can see why that would be this bad. And they come to me and I go, well, this is, I tell the whole story about the football player, and then they just burst into tears and go, yeah. And it's not necessarily one big thing. A lot of the time, it's a combination of things where you just feel overwhelmed. And then you develop coping mechanisms, but coping mechanisms can last for years, but then it can be like a dropper full of water in the cup that spills it over, right? And then physically you are just done. Like you are just being held together with coat hangers and sticky tape up until then. And then, it just all starts to unravel and come apart. But once people do have that realization, like you had that realization, I guess, then, well, you're exposing a lot of emotional pain a lot of the time as well. And people try to avoid that. Would you say that? Not necessarily in yourself, because you really worked hard.
I mean, I definitely was at a point, especially with the IBS and the rashes, I was at a point where I was unconscious to it. So I wasn't sure what the origin was, but now looking back, I can say, I can pinpoint where it came from. And the back pain especially was, I think it was the biggest thing because it was the most painful I've ever experienced. Like it
Scary.
felt like a big injury to me, and I had no impact. And so I was like, this is very strange to me. And when that signal happened again, when something else traumatic had happened in my professional life, again, it was a stress in the environment that was, I was responding. So our body is responding in this fight or flight response because it thinks it's fighting for its life, and our body responds to it straight away when actually we are safe. It's just our brain sending signals to our nervous system that's saying you are being attacked.
Oh, yeah.
But now
and it
overreacts. And now I don't think I've told this story on a podcast before, but I have told it to a few people. I went through a lot of just before, coming to the point of burnout and just, I've had enough. I came to the point where I was overwhelmed, as you said earlier, like my cup was overflowing. I had no idea what else I can do. So I got to the point where I went into meditation and I started working on breathing techniques, on mindfulness training. And it took me a good 3 to 6 months to find something that was suitable for me. And even now I'll dip in and out of certain patterns and specific techniques. But what I did find is I've had hip pain for a very long time. I'd probably say it was probably originated around 2012-ish. And I always thought it's because I was running. Running's bad for you, right, guys? So it's because I was running, my knee started aching, and I don't know for sure if something traumatic had happened because I never went for an MRI and I didn't have a scan to figure out what was happening to the muscles and tendons in that area. But I know I was very close to probably a microscopic, if not a grade 2 or 3 tear, because I was in that much pain. But then that kind of went on, right? I went into strength training, I went into strength and conditioning, went into Olympic lifting, got to a point where it niggles, but it's not burdensome, but I know not to run on it. And then it got to a point where I was like, okay, my knee's hurting, my hips hurting. I've gone to physios, gone to chiropractors, and they're both saying, oh, well, my pelvis is out of alignment. I'm like, yeah, okay, then I've heard that one before. And now then I'm more educated in it. I'm just like, okay, well, there's only so much you can do. So I always went to a chiropractor I trusted. I didn't used to go to very many physios. And I was like, well, maybe it's just something I just need to keep working on. I need to keep mobilizing. I need to keep strengthening. I need to keep working on my glutes. And then after a while, I'm just like, this is just something that I've got to live with. Like, it sucks getting older, right? But at a point, but I was like, when did I get here? But then I got to a point where I was like, you know what? What's the harm in meditating on it? I meditated on it. I meditated on the pain around my right hip. That has been the biggest cause of aggravation. Like, forget about my knee right now. I was like, let's just do the hip, because that hurt first and then my knee followed. And then I was almost at that tear stage. And then I got to a point where I was like, okay, I'm just going to meditate on it and just take away the pain, whatever pain was there. And I didn't really, the meditation was very specific, but then after, I didn't really pay it much attention until I was sat on the sofa talking to one of my friends. And this was, I think I was online. So I had her on video chat. And I was sat in the most awkward position you could ever imagine. Like, one foot was up on the couch, one knee was bent, and then I was almost half leaning on the couch on the side. I wasn't even the back against the couch. I was in like the most awkward position. And I sat there for almost an hour and I didn't move. And then coming off the conversation, I was like, wait a second, I've got no pain in my hip. And then I'm just like, I always almost have to move every couple of minutes. I have to niggle, I have to fidget, I have to do something, because I can't sit still in a certain position, because anybody with an injury knows it will cause you aggravation if you're not moving. And so I'm just thinking, well, I can't sit in a flexed position. I can't sit in a position where my hip flexes flex. I need to stretch it out. And I'm just like, I've not moved and I've not felt uncomfortable. What? And then I went back to the point of meditation, and I'm just like, touch wood again. No, you find it. It's not happened since. So since
Wow,
that
Tuls.
meditation session, I've not had any hip pain. So I tried it with my knee. Same thing.
No.
Yeah.
So is this a meditation, not a guided meditation, but one that you've done yourself?
I've accumulated some of the meditations that I've learned from Deepak Chopra at that time, different things I was following on YouTube, and I focused on the area of pain. And I think it might have taken at least 1 or 2 sessions. But there was one time with my knee, I was like, it was really painful. It was painful to walk up and down the stairs, and nothing substantial had happened. I didn't even go for a run. And then I was like, I'm annoyed with this. I don't even know why this has happened, and this is aggravating. So I tried it with my knee, and that was my second attempt. So because I did it with my hip, I'm like, okay, this can't be a fluke. Is this a fluke? I don't know. So when I did it with my knee, and the next day, no word of a lie, didn't feel my knee. And I'm just thinking, it hurt to walk up and down the stairs. And now I can't feel any pain after my purposeful meditation. And I'm just like dumbfounded, because now I want to know more research around it.
Sure. There is a book called Body Mind, which I do have, but it's packed. Really interesting book. And it speaks about all of these things in a very layman's terms, I guess, and gives examples about clients that this doctor worked with. Really interesting book. And it does have things like when you feel tight around your neck and your chest, and what the psychological meaning that you can give to that, and then knees and hips and things like that. Oh wow, Tuls, maybe you should release some of these meditations that you do. I know, it's interesting.
Well, I haven't done them. I haven't recorded any of those particular meditations, but I definitely feel like there needs to be more science around. Like Dr. Joe Dispenza does it a lot. Like he is very scientific in his spirituality approach, because people sense spirituality and have this negative connotation with spirituality. But trying to take it as a scientific approach means that it has more credibility, and with that credibility, he's now been able to heal people. And he actually advocates and says it isn't an overnight thing. It doesn't just happen straight away. Like mine, maybe it is an anomaly, but for many people it does take a very long time to go through those emotional baggage that you've been carrying. And
there's layers and layers and layers and layers of it,
and it's been festering in your muscles. And so I found a really good article, and it's quite an old study. It was a study in the early 1920s, and it said that researchers had found that the activity in certain cells, especially in tuberculosis, had decreased when emotional stress was induced. So in fact, it was also suggested that living with stress increases the risk of tuberculosis by suppressing the immune system. But what I also find funny is same study. This was obviously in the introduction and a lot of the other studies that they were looking at, and it said the stress had many effects on the human nervous system and caused structural changes in different parts of the brain. So chronic stress can lead to atrophy in the brain and decrease in the brain's weight. So the brain mass can actually decrease, and those structural changes bring about the differences in response to stress, cognition, and memory. So it actually has a massive impact on the way we recall stuff.
Absolutely, it does. Yeah, and how you respond to things. But you be very mindful about how you respond to things, but you can't. Well, people aren't. I guess you can't be, but people aren't anyway, mindful about everything. And so you go back to a traditional or your standard response to things, right? But that can be an overreactive, and it is for a lot of the clients I work with. So their body overreacts over little things, like they'll just get so tense emotionally and physically tense. You know, so if your emotions are tense or you're holding something back, then your body just totally responds in the same way, and your muscles are replicating your thoughts. So I see that in people when they turn up, and exercise helps because being stronger or being, yes, being stronger helps, but it's not the one thing that's going to override everything else.
Oh, for sure. And for sure. And that's the thing. It's what can we do to overcome these stresses? So it's like daily exercise, sleeping, and getting
Yes.
adequate recovery in there, and practicing relaxation techniques such as mindfulness, such as breathing techniques, such as, how do you pick up habits and tips and tools that could calm your nervous system. Like earlier today, I finished up a call. It was a coaching call for marketing and branding, and I'm not hot on that area, but as a business person, you kind of need to know all elements of your business, right? You need to know about the content. You need to know about how you're editing, and then how you're branding, how you're marketing. But it's not my strongest point. And all of a sudden, like it just dawned on me. I've been sat in this room working away, and I'm just like, I just need to breathe, and I just need to get out. And it was pitch black, and I never walk in the dark, just because it's a thing of mine, and maybe old habits, fears, I don't know. Like walking alone at night isn't something that I do very often. And again, it's a habitual thing, in terms of women at night walking alone. So I just put my coat on, like wrapped it really warm because it's gone quite cold here. And I was like, screw it, I need to get out. I need to get some air. But it was one of those things that was like, what can I do to elevate my mood instantly? And as soon as I was out there, within 5 minutes, I felt better, because it was something that I knew that would help alleviate. And I couldn't even describe to you how stressed I felt before then. It's not something that is usual for me. So I'm just like, something has obviously triggered me deeply, and the only thing I could have done is move my body and get outdoors and do something. Like I could have danced, or I could have done something that is more joyful, but at that time I was like, I just need some air. And that's like, a lot of people don't have first the self-reflection to then say, well, this is what's happening, I wonder why it's happening, rather than going, well, what can I do with it? It's almost like, I need this gone, this is painful right now, I need this gone, rather than actually going, where is it actually stemming from? What is actually happening? What is happening in my environment?
Well, I think this is where medication and alcohol come in for a lot of people too, because it can give you the impression that it's calming you down anyway, just take the edge off it. But it's not, in truth, doing it might be calming down the physical signs of it, or the mental signs. I don't know what I'm trying to say here, Tuls.
It's almost like a block, isn't it? We welcome that block. We welcome that numbness from alcohol or food, or some people abuse exercise in that way too. Yes,
absolutely they do. And they don't realize they do either, until their knee starts to hurt and their hip starts to hurt, and that emotional or financial or whatever it is burden that they're carrying is still there, right? You can't run away from it.
And I mentioned right at the start of podcast, I said self-consciousness and lacking self-confidence can actually stem from leaning on other substances or masking what's actually happening internally. Because the thing is, we can't see what's happening in our body. We don't see our body is constantly fighting for homeostasis. Like it's never balanced. It's always going up and down. It's trying to regulate our temperature. It's trying to, keep us dehydrated, is telling us what we need in terms of energy and fuel, and sending signals to our body, and all of a sudden we have this something in the environment that kind of impacts us, but we don't see it from an internal point of view. We see it as an external, and we think that we need to solve it externally with external things like medication or substances like alcohol, whatever it is.
It can work for a little while, but it won't work forever.
No. And actually, it goes to my first point that I mentioned about stress in the environment prevents us from failing and learning. And I probably confused a lot of people on that statement right at the beginning. But just to clarify, when I said about that study earlier, and it talking about how stress affects the memory, and stress has negative effects on learning. It basically is hippocampus dependent. If your hippocampus is loading data and it's not familiar with a new environment it's being exposed to, more adrenaline, more steroids, and you're leading to alterations in your long-term memory, well, that all has a massive impact on the memory formation. So actually, if we're not able to learn, if we're not able to step outside of our comfort zone and fail, well, how are we able to move forward from our stress, or move forward from our environment? It's almost like going into an environment and full well a person intimidates you, or a person environment, the boardroom intimidates you, and all of a sudden you're not as confident as you were. You probably won't speak up as well, or you probably come out of the boardroom going, oh, I had this really creative idea and I wish I would have said this, right? And you're stifled in other areas of your life, in creativity and intelligence and wit, in humor, whatever it is, right? You're stifled in those areas because you're in a stressful environment, or you're surrounded by stressful people or energy.
Yeah. Oh no, it's also interesting, and it's all connected as well, isn't it? You might think you're stressed one day and you're not stressed the next day, but there'll just be a different form of it affecting you, like a knee pain.
So.
Yeah,
I think so, and I think it's different for women as well because of our menstrual cycle, and even when we're training, like we know for female athletes, it's better to train on certain days where you've got, higher blood cells, higher oxygen consumption. But for some women, when they say, well, physiologically you're able to train, but actually physically they're unable because they're debilitated by cramps. So you can't then abuse that great cycle, that great part of your period, your menstruation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Hormones are so interesting to me, and yet so a mystery, such a mystery. And I think even as females. Sorry?
And with the brain, I feel. What were you going to say?
Gosh. Yeah. Well, the brain is affected by hormones as well.
Yes.
So, and as we get older, as women, our estrogen changes, create changes in our brain, create changes in our body structure. And then I think it can also contribute to weakness as well, which contributes to pain. It's just this giant circle, but it doesn't have to be a vicious circle. And I think that's what we're trying to say here. There is a circle of life, but it doesn't have to be that vicious circle that is so often referred to. So even if there is a little bite here or a bite there, there are tools and tips and tricks that Tuls knows. That because you've done it, right? You've been through it.
And the thing is, it's about how we're able to tolerate things. So if we take a gym, for example, you're not going to go straight in to lift a 30k dumbbell, right? You're going to probably start off on the 8s, 10s, 12s, 15s, and then you're going to you should, right? Or if, for example, you've been ill and you haven't been to the gym, you're not going to be able to go back to the weights that you were previously lifting. So give yourself time. Your body will adapt and accumulate and build its level of tolerance. But what we're not doing is acknowledging that level of stress is sometimes good for us. Like, people have the stress on deadlines. Some people like that little bit of pressure about going, oh, well, let me just leave it to the last minute because I get a little bit of tension and stress that makes me propel forward. I'm not that type of person, but there are some people out there. But it's almost like saying, well, how can we as individuals build our tolerance of stress so then we're ready for whatever outcome comes for us, right?
Yeah. And that is what your course is about too, building that tolerance to stress in a healthy and respectful way to your body.
For sure. For the elite Elevate Success leadership formula, and those things have been evolved to balance and tap into those methods and tools so you can recognize what's happening. We give you information to shift the pattern so you can control the outcome instead of the body taking over and then placing additional stresses on you. So how can you deal with what's in front of you without having a little bit more added to your cup and before it overflows? So how can you manage the events in a healthier way? How can you go through the shock or anxiety of stressful events that are beyond your control? And the leadership formula that I've created definitely helps people navigate through that path with coaching support. So if you were interested, thanks for the plug, Cal. There is a link in the description below. So, oh my goodness, like we can just keep going on about this one. I know I've talked a lot in this one.
No, I feel like I've talked equally. And we could keep going on about it because it's a subject that interests both of us, and both of us have a foot in the door in our professional careers with this, right? So neither of us, I'm going to speak only for myself. You are way more competent in more parts of the circle than I am, but I specialize very solidly in the physical side of things. For myself, I do the meditation and the reflection, but I don't coach that professionally, whereas you have that ability. So yeah, but I just see how even though I say I coach the physical side of things, certainly the conversations that we have during those sessions it's just a conversation, right? But it does open people's eyes and make them think maybe a little bit more. But then I would have to send them to someone else to actually professionally.
To a point, I agree, but I feel like as a performance coach, we have to be quite holistic in our approach. And I was speaking to another S&C coach about this, and they were talking about mental stress as an umbrella. And it's actually saying what we're influencing, what we're impacting with their training might be the biggest thing that tips them over the edge when it comes to their training. So by you having a conversation with your clients, Cal, you're able to then say, well, what is your tolerance level right now? Because actually, if you're being tipped by family, by work, by additional stresses, well, training is a different stressor. And what can you do in that session that doesn't tip them over the edge? And that is a very crucial line to have, to pivot as a coach.
Yeah. I find people will progress innumerable times faster if you don't push them too far, because then you're adding another layer of stress. And you can still be competitive, but it's just seeing those goals ticked off accelerates people so much more than forcing them to stick to a number. And in terms of pain, it dissolves is the word. It just dissolves. It doesn't disappear because you're stronger and come back if you get weaker. It dissolves out of them. It's a nice magical way of thinking about it, but that's sort of how it feels to me. So the combination of the conversations and their realizations, and perhaps then their own self-reflection, because they do say, by the end of the session, there's such a difference to the beginning. And I know I haven't made them stronger in that session. It's impossible.
Yes,
right?
but what you've done is just manage the level of tolerance in other ways, but also looked at the short-term plan versus the long-term reward.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And just reduce their stress. A drop of full here and a drop of full there, enough for them to then get through the day or to get through the next minute. Sometimes people are quite fragile and vulnerable when I see them.
Yeah. And I think that just comes back to that expertise of we're not just specialists in physiological terms, but in terms of we know how to manage the tolerance of the stresses, and knowing the external environments can have an impact on people's progress. And that's why we advocate the recovery as well. But it could mean a active recovery on what type of training we're doing. So again, it's all adapting to our clients' needs and desires regarding their long-term goal. But Cal, it's just been so interesting to talk to you about this, and it's really interesting to talk about physical manifestations of pain.
Oh, I agree. And I've seen so much evidence for it. So I hope people do start to think that maybe a sore knee isn't just a sore knee.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And because we were talking about recovery and, the tolerance levels, our next podcast is a little bit of a sneaky peek. We are going to be talking about recovery post-exhaustion, and we're going to be talking about boundaries, slowing down, mental recovery and physical recovery, and what the difference is between them both, and how can we marry them, just as Kelly and I this episode. So
Interesting.
yes, definitely. I'm looking forward to that one too. But thank you, Cal, for being absolutely awesome. And the next session will be out shortly. But if you liked this, please do subscribe to YouTube if you're watching this on YouTube. We're also on Podbean and Spotify. But if you'd like to support us and become a Patreon member, the description is in the link below. So don't forget to hit the like button and share this with your family and friends if you found this useful. And we'd love to see you back on our channel soon. And look up for the next episode on recovery post-exhaustion.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tuls. Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye.